Howdy, howdy, folks. Once again, this is Donnie. And in the previous videos of this series, we've looked at how to create partitions and format partitions on a Linux machine. So we've looked at how to create them in two different ways. We've learned how to create both the master boot record partitions, that's the old school type of partition, using FDisk. And we've also seen how to use GDisk to create the new fangled, fancier, and better performing, more bells and whistles GPT type of Linux partitions. And we've also looked at how to mount partitions from the command line. But the problem with mounting partitions from the command line is that once you reboot the machine, that partition is no longer mounted. So we want a way to have those partitions automatically mount every time we boot the machine. And we're going to do that by adding an entry for our new partition into what we call the FStab file. Now, before we look at that FStab file, let's look at the current setup here. We've got up here, we have the SDA drive. And by the way, this is a Debian machine, in case you didn't see that. But up here we have the SDA drive. This is the layout that was created when I installed the operating system. So that's the default. And I added this SDB drive down here. And I just made one partition out of it. And I formatted it for ext4. And I left it at the type 83, which is the default Linux type of partition. And of course, if you need a review on how to do all this, just go back and look at the previous videos and then continue with this one. But anyway, what we want to do now is edit this FStab file, and it is in the etc directory. Okay, there it is. And that's what the FStab file looks like. And what we have here in this particular machine, this Debian machine, we have two partitions. We have this one here. This is the root partition up here. And then down here we have the swap partition. And I'm trying to get that to highlight better, but I think you can see what it is there, right? But anyway, the way this starts out, this is dev SDA1, this root partition. And we see there that it's designated by a UUID number. And back in the old days, we used to have this listed in the FStab file as the partition name itself. So this would have been dev SDA1 back in the old days instead of this UUID number. And the same thing here. This is dev SDA5, and back in the old days, this just would have been dev SDA5. But we're using UUID numbers now, and UUID, by the way, stands for Unique Universal Identifier Number. And this is just a random number that gets generated and gets assigned to a partition when we create it on the Linux system. There's supposed to be some benefits to that. For one thing, it's supposed to make it just a little bit more reliable, for mounting your partitions. It's supposed to help make mounting partitions faster when we boot the machine. Unfortunately, I don't have any facts and figures, to really back that up or to show if it really is faster, but that's the theory anyway. But anyway, in the FStab file, we have first unique universal identifier or universal unique identifier. That is the designation of that hard drive partition. Over here is the mount point, and you can see there that that is a slash, which means that it is the root partition. Then here we have the format of that partition. So here we have ext4, and over here we have the mounting options, and here we just have it as errors equals remount -RO. Well, take a look at what these different options are here in just a few moments. And then here we have a couple of other columns, which are just numbers, and this one here is going to designate whether or not this will be included in a dump operation. So if that's a 0, then this partition will not be included in a dump operation. And a dump, by the way, is a type of backup that you can do. But if it's a 0, it will not be included in a dump operation. If it's a 1, it will be included in a dump operation. And then over here, we have this, which will be either 0, 1, or 2. And if it's a 0, this means that when we boot up the system, then we will never do an FSCK operation on this partition automatically. And FSCK, if you don't know what that is, that's like file system check. It's kind of like the equivalent of check disk on Windows. It just checks your file system to make sure there are no errors. And if it's a 1, it means it has a priority over other file systems on the machine, on a priority over other partitions on the machine. If it's a 2, it's a lower priority. Okay, so here we have this as a 1, so this is going to be high priority. And then down here we have our swap partition. And with the swap partition, you can see there that there is no mount point on it because, well, it's a swap. We're not mounting it. And it is a type swap. And over here, SW. And of course, we have 0 and 0 because we don't need to be doing a backup of the swap partition, and we don't need to be doing an FSCK of the swap partition. Now, I've created that other partition already and have it formatted, as I've said a moment ago. And if we wanted to, we could just go in and do like this. And we could put the mount point, let's say mount stuff, for example. And it's going to be ext4. And we could do defaults for the mount options. And we could do like 1 and make it 1 as well. You can have more than one partition with a priority number of 1. Or I could change it to 2, either way. But we'll just change it at 1, okay? And that works, okay? That works, but as I said, it's going to be preferable to do the UUID number. So we'll get to that here in just a moment. But first, let's look at this, the defaults here. This is the mounting option. And if you look at the man page for the FStab file, you can come down here and you can see what these defaults are. And so the defaults, in this case, we're going to have our drive or our partition mounted as read-write, so we can read from it or write to it, either one. We'll have this SUID option on it, which means that we can set the SUID permission bit, also the SGID permission bit on files. And the dev means that we can create device files on there. The exec means that we can run executable programs from that partition. The auto just means that when we do a mount-a command, we'll look at that command in a minute, it will reread that FStab file and it will automatically mount any partitions in there that have not yet been mounted. The no user means that only someone with the proper root privileges can mount that partition. And the async means that read and write operations will be performed asynchronously. And we can, if we wanted to, we don't have to use the default options. We can have other options as well. And so, for example, we can come down here and see what some of these are. Oh, actually, no, we won't. We'll have to go over to the mount man page for that. And so we'll look at the mount man page. We'll come down here and see what some of these other options are. Okay, here we go. And there are lots and lots of different options. We have some options which are not specific to any particular file system format. Like, for example, we got a bunch of them here, which will apply whether the partition is formatted for ext4 or ext3 or XFS or BTRFS or whatever else. And then if we scroll on down, we'll see we also have some options which are specific to certain file system formats. But anyway, there are a whole bunch of them here. I'm not going to read all of them. You can read them yourself, but I will point out a few of them. For example, no A time. This can be very useful at times because what the A time does, and by the way, even though A time was not listed up there in that list of defaults that you saw over on the FStab man page, it actually is turned on by default. So what this means is that when you access a file, even if you just to read it, it will change the A time on that file. And just to give you an example of that, let's go back over here. And I am going to get out of this because I don't really need to save that. Oops. There we go. And so let's go ahead here and look at some files. Let's go ahead here and create a file. I always get confused as to whether there's supposed to be an S at the end of that stat command or not. but anyway, we have this file here that we've created, and you can see there we have an access time. Okay, and we also have modified time and change time. And so the last time this was read is our access time. Well, the last time was access for anything, even if it's just for read operation, write operation, doesn't matter. Last time it was accessed. That's the access time. And modification times was last time that the file was changed. And the change, well, the change is just when the attributes have been changed. So it's kind of confusing there. So modified is when you like edit the file, and the change was like when you change an attribute, like when you change permission settings or something like that, okay? But anyway, the access time, it's handy in a way, but it's one of those things that's not entirely necessary. So one handy thing you can do, especially like if you're on a server, maybe you got a really, really busy database server, and you want to speed up the performance of it, you can turn off that access time on that partition by setting the no A time mounting option. Just to show you how this works, let's see here. And it's nothing in it because it's an empty file. We'll do the stat again. And you can see there that indeed the access time did change. Now, by turning off that A time function, that will allow us to make it so that this time here will never change. It'll always be the same, okay? And that can save a lot of disk accesses. It's also very good for if you are using a solid state drive, because solid state drives are, they're only good for a certain number of writes, although they're a whole lot better than they used to be. But if you turn the A time function off on a solid state drive, that can help extend the life of that solid state drive. But anyway, that's just an example of the type of thing you can do. And you can read down here and read all these other descriptions here. You can read them on your own. And I'm not going to go through every one of them, but there are just a lot of them here which could be useful, right? And just another good example. Let's see here. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. The no exec, that's another good example. Let's say that you're setting up some sort of a file server and you want to make sure that nobody can execute malicious programs from your file server. Well, you just set it with the no exec option on that partition that you're using to serve out those files. And that way nobody can run any programs from that partition. Okay? So anyway, how's this work then? So let's go back over here. And let's go back down here with this again. Okay, and this time, instead of putting defaults in there, let's go ahead here and do no A time. Okay, and I could just leave it like that if I wanted to, but I can also have more than one option if I want. So I could come back here, I put a comma, and do no exec. And then I'll do 0, and we'll make it 2 here for the FSCK priority. Okay, and that's all there's to it. And so you've just edited your file, your FStab file, to make that SDB1 partition automatically mount every time that you boot this machine. Now, here's the thing. I'm still not going to save this because I really don't want this SDB1 here. What I want instead is to have the UUID number there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come over here to this window. And by the way, just a little tip here. If you are doing this on a server which does not have a graphical desktop interface installed, your best bet is to remote into that machine from another machine that does have a desktop interface. That way you can do your copy and paste from one window to another. Okay, just remote in there with 2 different windows, 2 different sessions, and copy and paste from one to another. Because trust me, you don't want to be typing in these UUID numbers by hand. It's going to make it very error prone. So what I'm going to do here is do sudo, actually let's clear this, sudo blkid, like so. And so down here we see our UUID number for dev SDB1. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just copy this like so. I'm not going to copy that last double quote symbol because I want to get rid of those double quotes anyway. And so we just go ahead, do like this, copy. And then I'm going to come over here to the other window. And you want to be insert mode when you do this, assuming you're using Vim, of course. I mean, you can use any text editor that you want to, but I'm a Vim guy. But so that's what I use. But if you are in Vim, you got to be in insert mode here before you do this. Okay, so just go ahead here and click on that. Okay, well, Vim is just a little bit flaky here on Debian. It's not going to let me paste this in, obviously. So what we got to do now that we've copied that, we got to come over here and we got to paste this into our FStab file. Only problem is I'm normally a Vim guy. You just saw me using Vim, to do my editing. However, the copy and paste on Vim on this Debian machine, it's not working properly. So we're going to use Nano. As much as I hate Nano, we got to use it. Got no choice here, right? And of course the disadvantage here is that we don't have a nice color coding, but at least the copy and paste will work. So we can just go ahead and paste that in. And then I got to come back here and get rid of this double quote. And I go back over here and I just do stuff right there. And ext4, of course. And for our options, as I said, I could do defaults, but rather than do that, I'm just going to go ahead here and put no A time and no exec. And then 0. Don't necessarily need to do a backup with that. and we'll do 2 there for our priority. And then we'll save it. And we'll do Control X here, and we want to save. Yes, hit the Y, and that's the name of the file. Okay, so there we go. It's saved. Yay! And of course, the one thing I've neglected to do was create my mount point directory. So I'm just going to go ahead here and do sudo make dir stuff. All right. And, you know, normally you'd have a mount point name that's a little bit more descriptive of what you're going to do with that partition. But for now, stuff works. And remember, too, what we said before, you know, people have different opinions about where to put their mount point directories. In this case here, we're just putting it at the root of the file system. That works. It's okay, right? So anyway, the next thing we want to do before you reboot this machine is to test this FStab file to make sure it does not have any errors in it. Because if you have any errors in that listing you just put in there, guess what? The machine's not going to boot. It will hang as soon as it encounters the errors on that partition that it cannot mount, and it'll just stop. And then the only way you can fix that is to boot up on some sort of live media and then mount the root partition of the machine, and then go in there and edit your FStab file in order to correct the mistake. But we're going to avoid all that pain by doing sudo mount-a, like so. And this does 2 things for us. First, it automatically mounts that new partition that we just added to the FStab file, and it also checks the FStab file to make sure there are no errors. So this way, when we reboot the machine, we won't have to worry about having any errors in there. Nothing is going to be in there that will stop our machine from rebooting. And we do the mount command like so, and you see down here, indeed, we did mount our partition just as we wanted to, and everything is all good. So that's pretty much it. But if you want more information, read the man page for FStab. You got a lot of good information there. And also read the man page for mount. Especially read the part about the different mounting options. You can play around with them on a virtual machine. Won't hurt anything. If you trash your virtual machine, you know, hey, just create a new one, start all over again. No problem. But lots of good stuff there. And might even give you some ideas on the things you can do when you mount your partitions, especially in the area of security. Anyway, that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.